been knitting for a while now. I wonder what it's like to write a knitting pattern. Hold on, what is that? That sounds like the knitting pattern police. Hi, hello, and welcome back to another video. Today, I want to talk about why we should stop complaining about bad knitting patterns. I saw a video that was made by Deborah Knits, and she made quite a few points that I personally have a different view on. So if there's anything that you disagree with in this video, you should go watch Deborah's video because most likely you'll agree with her. The thing that I'm knitting on is the Upstream sweater, by the way, by Rose Knitwear, and I will be talking about this later because one could argue that this is also a bad knitting pattern. Not a bad sweater, not a bad result, but a bad pattern. Also, I want to acknowledge one thing before we get started. I am aware that a lot of knitting patterns cost money. However, I personally view the cost of knitting patterns as a luxury expense. Hobbies are not a necessity. You could feel like they are a necessity for your well-being, but if you can truly not afford to pay the price of a knitting pattern, you will most likely be turning to free knitting patterns, and you will not let your kids go hungry over the cost of a knitting pattern. Also, to get started, from my point of view, there are two types of bad knitting patterns. The first type is a pattern that is poorly written, where the math is not working out, and that is sometimes not very comprehensible. And the second type would be just a pattern. It could be well written, but the pattern produces a bad result. A sweater that fits badly, any other garment that fits badly, or any type of product that does not look the way it should, or somehow does not fulfill the physics that it should fulfill. There could also be an overlap between those two categories, like a poorly written pattern that produces a bad result, and that overlap is encompassed in the concepts that I will be talking about. But I would argue that if you are bad at writing patterns and if you are bad at designing stuff, then you're so bad at the thing as a whole that most likely you are gonna fail to put your knitting pattern out into the world, or people are gonna find out very quickly that you're doing a really bad job. So I will be focusing mainly on the first type, that is a badly written pattern or a badly mathed pattern. So you might be wondering, what business do I have talking about bad knitting patterns? First of all, I have been knitting for I don't know how long, like 2 years, 3 years. I have started out using other people's patterns. I have knit a fair amount of pieces. I would say like about 60 in total. Like accessories and garments and other wearables and plushies. And I have also written 2 knitting patterns. One of them is free, it is charted, and the other one has written instructions, and it is a charity pattern. So I do charge money for the pattern, but all of it goes to charity. I will be linking them down below if you're interested. I hope they're not badly written. And for me personally, the biggest reason to write these patterns is that I was curious about the process, curious what it would take to actually take all those steps to put a pattern out into the world, how you would go about designing a garment. I just wanted to try what it's like, just for fun, not because I wanted to make a side hustle out of this. And I also have to mention that they're fairly simple patterns. I'm pretty sure that if I would try and design and grade and write up a knitting pattern for a more complex garment like this has a 16 stitch repeat knit purl pattern, I'm pretty sure my brain would just short circuit. There would be no way I would be able to feasibly write a pattern for a garment like this. And the third reason why I think I have business talking about knitting patterns is I am a copywriter by trade. I have been working as a copywriter full-time for about 5 years now. So writing instructions for people and writing calls to action is what I do all day, every day. I have a fair bit of practice, and I've also met quite a few people who have a hard time writing and putting their thoughts into words. But should we keep those people from expressing their thoughts in the form of words? No. No, everyone is allowed to use words. And that is one point that I will be coming back to. So the first argument that a lot of people make about bad knitting patterns is bad patterns are bad for knitting because the experience is frustrating and then people don't want to do it anymore. Can I just say, I'm about to offend an entire nation right now. This is such an American way of viewing this. Let me tell you one personal anecdote. I did a semester abroad at the University of Minnesota, and I took a class that was a 2 or 3 level class. And that class was called Cognitive Science 201 or 301. So it was a fairly advanced class. And we were about to go into midterm season, and we had been talking about the exam in class at that point, and then the professor handed us a list of questions on all of the topics that were covered in that class. And he told us, go home and answer these questions as a homework. And I thought to myself, okay, that's nice. He's getting us started thinking about all of the topics that we've covered in class. He is trying to get us into that exam mindset. And I went home and I did my homework, and then I came back to that class the following week. And then he went like, we're gonna be talking about the answers now. We are gonna be finding out whether everyone answered their questions correctly. And I thought, I haven't done that since elementary school. Like, talked about my homework in class. Like, usually you just hand it in or you just forget about it. But yeah, we could do that. We could talk about the answers to these questions. And we talked about the answers to the questions. And then at the end of that lesson, the professor said, those were the exam questions. Just study those. Just study the answers that we've been talking about and then come to the exam next week. And I was mind blown. Like, what do you mean? You are just giving us these answers to learn by heart. That is not a challenge. Everyone's gonna get 100% on that exam. What do you mean? Then I went and I just learned these answers by heart, which is not hard. And I got a 99% on that exam. And I was very annoyed with myself because why did I not get 100? And there were people coming out of that exam who got like a 60 or a 70. Like, you had to do nothing for that grade and you still did a bad job. You were handed that 90% grade on a silver platter and you decided not to take it. That To this day, I can't comprehend that. And to me personally, like, I'm pretty sure they don't do it like that in the Ivy League. But to me, that is a core problem that also applies to the discussion about bad knitting patterns. Not everything is supposed to be easy. There is a lot of empowerment in figuring out solutions to problems you come across. And for many people, myself included, that seems to be what they like about the craft. That is what empowers them. That is a lot of the fun that we have in that craft. And also, every single knitting pattern that you attempt, you don't even have to successfully finish it, will teach you something about knitting. Like, even when it's a bad pattern and you come across a problem and then you have to go and do research to figure out how to solve it, that is going to teach you something. You're gonna learn something new. So one example for me actually learning something new from a bad pattern is this very sweater. As you can see, I am on the yoke, and the pattern is written in a way where it greets every single stitch at the door. Hi, hello, Mr. Pearl Stitch. It's so nice to have you here. Please take a seat. And to me, that is not a very good way of writing a pattern, because that makes it so hard to read. There's so much to read. That is like... And especially when I came to the short rows that are supposed to be at the back of the yoke, they were written out one stitch at a time. And at the same time, when you're doing the short rows, you're also doing raglan increases. And it's just a lot going on. I would have preferred to have a chart so that I can actually see the thing as a whole. Like, you can see the entire thing and then you can zoom in and see what you're supposed to do in every single step. Instead, every single stitch was written out and I had no idea what the whole was supposed to be. And how I decided to solve that problem was go through the short row section in the pattern step by step and just count how many stitches each short row was supposed to have. And the things that I learned doing this was, number one, how long is a short row supposed to be? Like in this pattern, they have them just running across the back part of the raglan and then the two sleeves, and the front part doesn't have any short rows. Also, I learned the designer doesn't go across the turning stitches. Like, the turning stitches is always gonna be in the same place. Whereas in other patterns that I've done, you go past the turning stitch for a few stitches and then you turn again. And since I am writing patterns myself, it has also taught me about pattern writing, because not every pattern needs to be written so that everyone can do it. It is okay for a pattern to be more advanced, because that's just my assumption. What the designer wanted to do here by writing it up stitch by stitch was to write a pattern for everyone, so that everyone, even beginners, can follow the pattern stitch by stitch. And by wanting to write a pattern for everyone, they actually wrote a pattern for no one, because beginners and more advanced knitters alike are likely gonna get overwhelmed by the sheer amount of verbosity and word vomit in that pattern. So within that argument that bad knitting patterns are frustrating and keep people from enjoying the craft, one other point within that bad knitting patterns are frustrating and keeping people from doing the craft is the point that a lot of people are doing knitting for recreational purposes to unwind and to relax in their spare time. And in that spare time, they do not have the mental capacity to be solving problems. And to that, I have to say that point is about 50% fair, I think. Because first of all, like, there is no part of life where you can avoid all problems. No matter what you do, no matter how easy it is, you're always gonna come across some hiccups that you have to solve. And also, if you really are so determined to eliminate all problems in that craft, then you can do some research. You probably have your own comfort designers. Like, a lot of people knit a lot of petite knit stuff because they know what they get with petite knit patterns. They're easy to understand, they're easy to do, and they produce fairly good looking garments. So you're probably just gonna stick to your comfort designers. Also, can I say doing your own research is free. Some people, like mostly Americans that I've met, seem to be allergic to doing their own research, which, referring back to that exam anecdote. Going on the internet, comparing different things, watching a video is free and it's not hard. Everything you need to be solving any problems in a knitting pattern are right at your fingertips. And even if you have to go to our advanced knitting and ask why your knit stitches are twisted, like, you are able to find a solution to that problem. But somehow Americans seem to really be allergic to learning. Like, they looked at Donald Trump 2017 to 2021 and they thought,
Yeah, let's do that a second time. That's gonna go well.
Let's get into argument number 2. Everyone is writing knitting patterns as a side hustle to earn money. First of all, is it bad to want to earn money? Isn't it very telling about our society that a lot of people cannot survive on a single income, or that they feel the need to supplement said income to keep up with the cost of living? Like, what does that say about us as a society? And should we really shit on those people? So it might be people not getting by on their, what's supposed to be their main income. That is heartbreaking. And maybe some people are being greedy. But honestly, let them be greedy. Because if their patterns are a scam, most knitters are gonna notice and just not buy them anymore. Also, second of all, like, I don't have the biggest community on Instagram or on YouTube. Have a look at my pattern stats, at my pattern sales, and tell me whether you think I'm getting rich off of this. Like, if I weren't to donate the money to charity. That is 50 euros a month. That is not even covering the time I spent on writing this. Even if I had done it poorly to speed up the process, I wouldn't be making a reasonable hourly wage. So I think it's quite unlikely that most people who write knitting patterns are doing it out of pure greed. Argument number 3. Printed patterns back in the day used to be so much better. Have you ever seen a vintage knitting pattern? Because there used to be no directions in knitting patterns whatsoever, from what I can tell. Probably because they couldn't afford paper. Because of all the world wars they started. I'm pretty sure you all know Engineering Knits channel. So if you're interested in seeing someone make mysterious knitting patterns, you should go watch her videos, because these old patterns, they seem even more chaotic than a badly written modern pattern. Also, my mother, who has been a knitter for almost 50 years at this point, she recently attempted to make a stuffed animal, a little fox, from a pattern in a very well-established German modern knitting magazine. And she had to start that project like 4 times. She had to rip that thing out 3 or 4 times because she said the math was not mathing and she just couldn't figure it out with 50 years of experience knitting. And it seemed to her that that pattern hadn't even been test knitted. So if a big magazine, if a big publication does this, I don't think printed patterns are as good as people make them out to be. And the last argument for this video is the one that is most important to me. Circling back to where I said, if someone is bad at writing, should we keep them from expressing their thoughts with written words? How can we expect people to learn to write good patterns without first writing some bad ones? Yesterday, as I was watching Deborah's video, I was scrolling through the comments just to see what everybody else had to say. And there was one comment that said, writing clear, replicable, creative patterns for garments that fit well and look good takes experience. How can we expect people to learn to write a good pattern without them publishing some bad ones first? And that, I think, describes it to a T. Let people be bad at stuff. When someone is bad at crafting and bad at writing patterns, that doesn't mean they're doing it with malicious intent. Also, knitting patterns, a bad knitting pattern isn't going to hurt anybody. In the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. People try, they do their best. And sometimes your best effort is still shit. But if you're genuinely trying to get better, isn't that such a wonderful thing? Like we always say how crafting is inherently political. And I think one of our political messages should be, let's hold space for people to be bad and to get better. Let's hold space for people to make honest mistakes with the things that they enjoy doing without violently ripping them apart for every mistake they make. Let's lift people up and support them so that they can learn and so that they can get better and that they can eventually contribute some really good stuff to the community because they were allowed to learn. So in conclusion, I truly believe that when it comes to knitting patterns, supply and demand is gonna take care of it. Or to say it in German, der Markt regelt sich selbst. There will always be people who feel like one designer's knitting patterns aren't gonna be worth their money. No matter whether they're selling the best written patterns in the world or just because that knitter had a bad day once and that day happened to be the day they attempted to knit that pattern. And as I mentioned in the beginning, well-written patterns can produce bad results as well. So I've made the wave sweater by Spektakelstrick, and the patterns are well written. The instructions are super clear, there's nothing to be desired, and still the garment fits badly. And sometimes that is for the knitter to deal with. Sometimes your body type just doesn't fit the garment, or sometimes the garment really is bad. But that's the beauty of knitting. You can always adjust and you can always rip back and you can always improve. Also, if you're willing to see a badly written pattern through, or you maybe reverse engineer the garment, you'll learn so much. And that knowledge is gonna be so valuable in the future, even if the knitting pattern was not valuable to you. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you're not entitled to a perfect result every time. You have to put in some work and some brain cells as a knitter. It is just as much your responsibility to deal with a pattern and maybe some problems as it is the designer's responsibility to produce the best pattern they can according to their current skills. Yes, it's annoying to spend money on making something and spending the time on knitting something, but after all, this is a hobby and we don't have to finish anything. Just frog and make something else. Like, you still have the yarn, you can reuse the yarn just fine. And I think learning new things and expanding your knowledge, albeit painful at the time maybe, is very valuable in itself. So maybe this entire video has just my personal outlook on life showing through. Whenever something I do doesn't work out, I tell myself, I learned something about the world or about myself or whatever by attempting this. And maybe I didn't achieve the goal that I set for myself, but I'm definitely richer by having learned something, by having a new little tidbit of knowledge. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think we should try and limit the amount of bad knitting patterns, or do you think it doesn't matter? When a knitting pattern is bad, you can just deal with it. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much for watching this video and have a good day.